So let's get into it. It is the day after the 10th anniversary of Ethereum, which is crazy to believe. So happy 10 years, everyone.
Ooh,
10 years. Woot, woot.
Happy 10 years.
Careful, everyone. Not too excited.
I just realized I just started our internal recording so we can get snippets.
Oh,
Cheyenne's got party things going. See, it's exciting.
Perfect.
Are we all just tired from 10 years of Ethereum?
Partying it out for like 10 years.
So for those joining, thanks for participating. Thanks for being here. We are obviously excited that Ethereum's been around for 10 years, and it has been both a long 10 years and a quick 10 years. I think I wasn't in it right from the start, but it's hard to believe. Who's been in it since it started? Josh, I know you were. Cheyenne, has everyone but me and Sonal? Everyone else? Pretty much? Yeah.
It's kind of like, in Interstellar, 10 years in ETH time is pretty much like a full century. I don't know how any of us are still like mentally with it. I mean, maybe I'm not actually.
Okay, with that, why don't you introduce yourself? Let's go around and say, I'm Jessica. I am the executive director at C4. Kent, do you want to go next?
Hi, guys. I'm Kent. I am on the CEP committee and have been for multiple years now. I have a startup in the ETH and ETH adjacent space with AI. I've worked with DAOs in the past and have done community building, and I love Ethereum.
I like the end. I also love Ethereum. All right, who wants to go next? Who
Sure.
loves Ethereum
Josh,
the most? All right.
I don't know if that one's me or not. I do like Ethereum though. Josh, I'm one of the original founders of C4. I get to sit on the Certified Ethereum Professional Committee and meet with these fine folks every week as we talk Ethereum. And I build video games in the blockchain space every day. I find Ethereum fascinating.
All right.
Cheyenne, you're next.
Yeah, so thanks. I'm Cheyenne. I've been chair at the CEP, like Certified Ethereum Professional Certification, which has been a really interesting journey. We learned so much while discussing valid questions. And Ethereum is actually one of the reasons I started my PhD, so we can get to that point a bit later. But now, 10 years in, I finished the PhD finally, and work on security of Ethereum and EVM-based chains almost every day. Dustin, you wanna?
I'm Dustin. I'm based in Singapore. We run a Ethereum community called Eve65, and yeah, just basically lurk on a lot of the core dev and calls related to Ethereum upgrades, and kind of just keep in touch with all the things that are happening within core protocol development.
And I'm Sonal. I'm also on the committee, and I am one of the co-founders of Interweave that was spun out of an Ethereum-based research unit. And now we are working on productizing the use of the ZK EVM for telecom companies. And happy anniversary, everyone.
Yay. Awesome. Thank you guys for being here, and as always for being part of the Certified Ethereum Professional Committee. Couldn't do it without you, obviously, as it's a community-driven community-driven exam, and we need you guys to be creating it. So let's talk about Ethereum, why we all love it, and maybe we should get started just by where it all started, because we've come a long way in 10 years, and I think a lot of things that have come from Ethereum have been amazing, and there have been some things that have turned into maybe duds, but let's get into what those different things are. So why don't we talk about the things that we really love about Ethereum and the different aspects of it that have delivered value over the past 10 years. Anyone want to get started with?
I could jump on that one because
Yeah,
it's
go for it,
kind of
Ken.
exciting just to reflect on how far we've come, and to your point or your question, Jessica, why did this start in the first place? I mean, if you think back to you know, 10 or more like 11, 12 years ago when ETH was just a white paper. Um, the reason for that is, you know, Vitalik had been working on Bitcoin extensively. He was the editor of Bitcoin Magazine and just had a real keen understanding for both that technology, but also like, you know, the current limits on it. So he's thinking, okay, well, and he shared this sentiment with a lot of other people in the space is like, well, what else could we do on Bitcoin? What if you wanted to have like what we would call today tokenized like equities or something, like have things that aren't just Bitcoin built on Bitcoin. And there were a lot of experiments with that at the time. One of the most popular projects was called colored coins, like a way to just emulate this on Bitcoin. And there's really a sense for a while that that could actually work. But then collectively, a lot of people, you know, working on that side of things kind of hit a wall, and certainly Vitalik. So uh, the original premise for ETH was like, okay, Vitalik is thinking, why don't we create a more generalizable blockchain that can do more than just sort of keep track of, you know, spends of its native token and really have arbitrary, what I guess the technical term would be Turing complete. Also borrowing from the concept of smart contracts and really being able to program all sorts of things. So in the white paper, Vitalik outlines things like, I believe, like the decentralized, you know, exchanges, trading, tokenization, and also DAOs and other things. And if you look at the white paper, it's pretty remarkable that the Ethereum, in fact, did achieve those things. And as we've seen now, it achieved it. The ecosystem has achieved those things at scale. And you know, you can see this with stable coins. You can see this with DeFi and DAOs. And so now it's kind of like fast forwarding to now. It's like, well, what else can we build? This stuff has worked so well, and scaling is always a challenge. But yeah, it's fun to reflect on how far we've come and how those goals have been met, really.
Yeah, the very, very early days, but like getting some traction. People are excited. People are talking about it. I remember there was like a series of T-shirts that they, and I'll use the royal they. I don't know who made the T-shirts, where they came from exactly, but it was all just very simple concepts of like, hey, here's you know, code that represents what you'll be able to do on Ethereum. And it was things like, you know, here's 3 lines of code that is a decentralized exchange. Here's 3 lines of code that is the tokenization of things, and 3 lines of code that, you know, does what Bitcoin does, basically. Here's Bitcoin in 3 lines of code built on top of Ethereum. So it was all very like, hey, here's extremely powerful concepts boiled down into very simple code. 10 years later, those things do exist. We haven't replaced Bitcoin. We'll leave that one out. But tokenization, decentralized exchange, like these things exist. They're not 3 lines of code by any means. That was optimistic, and I don't think the current code for, let's say, you know, an ERC20 fits on a T-shirt very reliably. But it's neat to see like those initial, like very simple concepts have matured into things that now we kind of just take for granted most of the time. We have token standards. Of course, there's tokens on Ethereum. That's boring. We have decentralized exchange and swaps on Ethereum. That's kind of boring now. We kind of just take it for granted. And I think that's one of the things where sometimes it's like, well, nothing's working on Ethereum, or like we haven't done these really cool things that we hope to see yet. But we kind of forget that we've really been like building infrastructure, building the pipes for 10 years.
Yeah, it's like saying, oh, we want to live on Mars. Well, we haven't done anything, so we're not living on Mars, even though like we've flown to the moon and all of this stuff. So we've done all of these amazing things, but if we haven't done absolutely everything, sometimes it feels like it's not enough. That was really well said, Josh. Yeah. Okay, so we know a little bit about where we've come from. What are the things that I guess really draw us to Ethereum still, those things that still deliver value that maybe we don't appreciate as much because we don't focus on that? Like you were talking, Josh, about stable coins and all of the DeFi and finance stuff. What are some other things that have been delivering value or been, I'd say, really effective because of Ethereum or as part of Ethereum for 10 years, or not for a full 10 years, but whatever. Jump in, Dustin.
I think zooming out, I mean, we're talking about like specific things that have been delivered, like, by like, DEXs and stuff. But I think what's really interesting is more of the way that Ethereum thinks about changes. And you can see kind of how it diverges from Bitcoin, where Bitcoin is, only soft forks, and the soft forks mean that we're only making the code like stricter. Whereas Ethereum's a very expressive kind of experimental space where we're like, is this possible? Are we even sure it's possible? Let's try it. And we've seen it with like the scaling approaches where we thought plasma was a way of scaling initially, and then we experimented in that direction. But Ethereum doesn't get caught in not invented here syndrome, or going down a rabbit hole and being stuck with a decision. Even that it's very ready to say this was an experiment that didn't work, and then we're going to reverse course and do something else. It was the same with sharding, where that was the scalability solution. And then they looked at it and went, okay, that's going to take a while to ship. So in the meantime, we're going to do the roll-up centric roadmap. And then now there's a little more introspection now about how that's doing. And it's always in a state of never resting on its laurels and going, we've made the right decision, and we know the path. There's always an internal kind of like dissension where there will be people asking, are we really on the right path? And what can we be doing to do decentralization, scaling, all of these things better? And they're so diverse that you are never really going to have groupthink in a direction, because there will be a group of people that dissent enough that these things will get seen to, or at least addressed.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Cheyenne, do you have anything you want to add?
Um, yeah, so I feel like my getting into Ethereum story has like as a good segue to like get into why, like what I think Ethereum is doing today was, so like in 2015 I was working at the Bitcoin ATM company, focusing on Bitcoins and ATMs and how to get cash to Bitcoin, Bitcoin to cash. And basically I wrote a whole cloud wallet management software that was like, it worked pretty good. And Ethereum came out. I was actually going back to my Twitter, and I realized in October 2015 was like, I tweeted that like I just did my first transaction on Ethereum, and it felt like Bitcoin in 2011, which I don't remember doing Bitcoin transaction 2011, but somehow I wrote that. So I was like kind of playing around with this, and I want to like, it was so exciting, like especially Bitcoin was going through a year-long like block size debate. And like I knew Reddit from our Bitcoin, and I was like, the reason I was on Reddit was like our Bitcoin, and all the conversation was about block size debate, which got really toxic, as you always remember. And I was like, okay, there's this Ethereum, can do things. I don't know what, but I want to do things with it. And I remember back in that startup, they were like, all right, that sounds good, cool, but can you do a like business proposal on like what do you want to spend time on, and how would you make this a product? And I spent like a week. I was like, I have no idea. I just want to like figure this out. And then there was the time that my master's supervisor kind of talked to me. He was like, if you're bored, you can come work with me again. And I was like, I don't have a focus for the first year. He's like, that's fine. I'll give you funds too. And I was like, sure. So that's actually around the time that I was kind of saying, all right, I'm gonna try to do both. So I'll write a simple app, a smart contract that just fetches price of like gold and stores it. And I was like, okay, how do you do this? What is Solidity? Trying to figure it out. And then I remember this moment that I wrote the code to fetch the API, and then I realized, who's fetching this API? Where is this happening? What is going on? And then I realized I'm touching like the Oracle problem that is like still till today. It's one of the more controversial topics to like solve. Like it's still like not fully solved, I would say, like with ZK, a lot of new innovations. But that was my first simple problem I want to solve on Ethereum. So that got me more interested into this, but also more confused about what I can do with this. And to that point, kind of like 10 years, like 9 years or 10 years after that, there's so many things we do with Ethereum. I like it just minted the 10-year anniversary NFT, and like there are so many things we can do. We can do governance and that, but still, the extent of the things we can do, I don't think we have any ideas. So like there are like so much that can be done. We don't know what they could be. They could be all the things we can imagine. Also, yeah.
Sona?
Yeah, I was going to just add to the question that you asked about what still excites us that's being used and some of the attributes that Dustin and Cheyenne mentioned. And it reminded me that actually before this stream, I was looking for a t-shirt to wear that had some Ethereum thing on it. Of course, I chose the black one, so you can't even tell it says ETH Denver on it. But that's besides the point. And I came across a shirt that I got when I was doing consulting at Accenture that says Cloud Kicks Ass, but AAS as a service. And I thought that was like the coolest, funniest, like most modern thing. And I was like, I'm gonna wear this everywhere as if like I was, selling the cloud or something. But I just remembered that that was kind of the idea that got me into blockchain, and what excited me about its attributes in the first place was because I was so excited about the idea of, having a way to store data and do automation and all these things in one place, and the different data related and computing capabilities that came about from cloud, which I know is not new at this point. I was new to it, and that's what excited me. But looking at that now, it's what led me straight to the idea of, loving the point of Ethereum around it being like a world computer, and the decentralization aspects of it, and really the immutability attribute really excited me from the start of just having one source of truth for data, and code that's run, and having a trusted machine that nobody owns, because we know it's something like the cloud, someone owns it. And then the privacy aspects that it enables is what has kind of kept me around, is that when there's different concerns about or lack of interest on other attributes about blockchain, like, in the enterprise space, we'll come across the question often of, do they really care about decentralization? And the opinions can vary so vastly. And whether or not they care about it, do they care about it enough to invest money in trying things out related to it? Or does it actually scare them because they lose control over things that they have control over? But the point of privacy is always so solid, because with things like zero knowledge that we're doing, we can actually prove things without revealing the sensitive data, and it just unlocks a whole wave of mainstream use cases that people understand. Like recently, a couple months ago, an article came out about Google's use of zero knowledge for wallets, and they were starting to use that word all of a sudden. So I think some of these attributes that excited us all at our initial interest in Ethereum are still very much solid, with privacy, immutability, and whatnot. And then all of the ways that it's evolved since are deeply technical, of course. But going back to those pillars is always really encouraging, just about the future and where we can continue to go with the technology.
Yeah, it is interesting when you think about like where we've come, and the idea of decentralization, and when people will start to adopt or want to use the technology, and maybe they want to use many aspects of it, but maybe not what got some people into it in the first place, or one of like those core pillars or beliefs of the technology. You said the thing about Google saying that they're using zero knowledge, or saying something about it. My first thought was, are they using it, or are they talking about using it, or are they using like zero knowledge? Like I think about when I got something in the mail about blockchain. I think it said like blockchain and marijuana. And I was like, what? And it was like, you can have this on chain and like buy into it. I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. And so you see this with new technologies where I wonder if that's what's happened. Probably not with Google and Zero with ZK, but who knows? Just wanting to jump on it. So should we talk a little bit about some of the projects? Well, Josh, jump in first. I see you want to say something.
I mean, that sounded like a good segue into like, I mean, especially during the ICO craze, we got to see everyone's idea of of what could go on, and they were all centered around the same thing of, let's tokenize XYZ. But there was some grander ideas. Let's put healthcare on the blockchain. Let's put hotel reservations on there. Let's put cars on the blockchain. Let's put anything and everything. And some of that, comes with good ideas, or some of it sounds great at first. Let's take healthcare. Oh, let's put healthcare on the blockchain. Sure, suddenly, because in my mind, this technology is about ownership, right? Like, I want to own what's mine, using cryptography and having it available wherever I go. So if we can, take my health and put it on chain, that it immediately maybe sounds okay. What we don't fully appreciate is that, one, healthcare is very, 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 very sensitive data, and you generally don't want it on a giant global world computer that's available to everyone. Two, there's a whole access rights that starts to come into play of like, okay, I have it. Who can read it? How do I revoke the ability to read it? Answer being, you generally can't. How do I manage who can update it? Am I as a user managing the key access rights, saying, okay, this doctor can look at it and update it, this doctor can't? There just becomes so much more nonsense that great idea, sounds awesome when it slips off the tongue or you read it in the first paragraph of a white paper, and it just kind of devolves into basically nonsense as you dig deeper into it. Does anyone else have like ideas of your favorite, like someone tried to do something on Ethereum and it was just like, this is not the time or place for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Cheyenne?
remember like there was, so you mentioned like ICO craze. That was a time that actually like it got insane. And I noticed like similar behavior to like metaverse, like NFTs for sure, but metaverse got like weirdly futuristic. And also like I basically remember this one example that there was like this press release of a company doing a partnership with a water sports championship, doing water sports championship in metaverse, and resulted in like 20% increase in their token value, which to me, or another one was like the office rental spaces in metaverse. And these were like announcements that people actually like talked about, and it resulted in token checks, price changes. And to me, it was absurd. Like, what do you mean, like office rental spaces in metaverse, or like water sports championships in metaverse? Like, does it matter if it's in water or not, if it's metaverse? Like, there were like so many of these questions that like got a bit insane. Um, but at the same time, it's also interesting because like even metaverse was something that I was excited about. Essential Land was like this grid that you could just buy and put your NFTs in there, and people started creating like crazy shapes and buildings in there. And some people had like this only 1 pixel and took like 20-story buildings and had like elevators you could go up. So this was like really cool. But then I feel like the idea of metaverse got like really overused and got so hyped that like it got out of control. And even for me that was excited, it was like too much. And then it kind of fell and everyone was like, oh, metaverse was just a scam. And I'm like, it wasn't before, it's not now, but you guys all made it a scam, like similar to like a lot of NFTs also. Which is like interesting narrative, like actual hype versus the tech. But yeah, that was another example. Like metaverse had some crazy companies doing crazy stuff.
Yeah,
It is
that's
fun to
a.
reflect on. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was just gonna say it's a valuable insight of a lot of things get called scams. Usually there's like good fundamental pieces. ICO, good fundamental piece. Tokenization, good fundamental piece. People using those fundamental pieces for nefarious and malicious, and yeah, that's where things get dicey sometimes. Go ahead, Ken.
Just going back and reflecting on the ICO bubble, that was a really interesting and like heady time, because it was like not necessarily the mainstream, but a bigger segment of the populace was starting to understand like, whoa, there, you can actually do something unique with this stuff. And ICOs, of course, you know, were making and eventually losing people money, but it was like this whole new thing and blowing people's mind with respect to like crowdfunding and of course the there were securities implications with that. But I think the stupidest ICO I ever saw was Sandcoin, which was going to tokenize sand. That was ridiculous. And there were scams everywhere,
All
outright.
sand?
What's that?
Like all sand or just
Or like, I don't know, you could like a
One
token would
bucket, just
represent
one
like
bucket.
a particular amount of sand. Probably in Russia, of course. You know, it's very transparent, but like just awful ideas. And I remember this whole phase where there was like blockchain euphoria. It was like, you know, with the healthcare stuff or whatever, like just sprinkle blockchain on it. It's like, oh fuck, we're gonna, pardon my French, but we're gonna make everything better with blockchain, and without people really articulating like, well, how is that useful? I think the example about transparency is really apt too, because like, you know, one of the superpowers of blockchains, and certainly Ethereum, is this default transparency, but there are many use cases where you'd want privacy, like healthcare. ZK knowledge, which I think we've talked about before in the past on these live streams, is kind of the fundamental piece of math that is going to make this possible. But to this date, I mean, Ethereum it does not have privacy built in. I think maybe that could be coming in the next few years. There are some layer twos like Aztec that aim to do that, but that's super important. But I think, yeah, the general theme here kind of being that there's different fits and starts and moves in different directions, but the ETH ecosystem has an amazing way of like learning from its kind of collective mistakes, and it is definitely down to experiment, to Dustin's initial point. I think Plasma is a great example. That just came up, and it reminded me of like being at a DevCon, you know, several years ago, and Plasma was like the magic answer that was going to help us scale. Originally, I believe it was sharding, but then it was like, well, cross-shard communication is too hard, and that was a dead end. But then Plasma is the thing. Plasma itself turned out to also be a dead end. I can't remember exactly why. There were some limitations to it, but that kind of served as like sort of the foundation for the type of thinking that would eventually become roll-ups. And then I think Plasma has kind of a new life in a roll-up context. I saw.
Plasma has a new life with regards to, I think there was something in account abstraction that has resulted in Plasma possibly having a role for scalability now. I think it was in the 7702 like call or something like that, where they discussed that there are some implications with 7702 that may mean that Plasma is not a dead end anymore.
Interesting. Plasma comes back. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see that. Also, a lot of people that were working on Plasma were the ones that eventually kind of helped drive the roll-up process. But ETH seems to be both anti-fragile and also just really apt at kind of growing and over time and adapting to its mistakes and just its experiences. It's very much like a living and breathing organism in that sense, whereas Bitcoin is this, for better or for worse, it's a very rigid, non-changing thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like I think one of the cool things about Ethereum is that in the sometimes something seems like a good idea, turns into a bad idea, and then that evolves into a great idea. And when we're laughing at some of these projects, like I guarantee everyone on this call and probably everyone watching has come up with some idea that you thought was going to be just amazing on Ethereum or related to tech or not. And then it turned out to be terrible. But then out of that idea sparked like a new seed. And then that became something that is awesome. And I think that's one of the things, like you were saying, Kent, with how we as a community and Ethereum as a blockchain, it evolves, it grows, things build and change. If we say, well, this idea didn't work, so the whole thing sucks, we're missing out on so many incredible things that we could be doing with the tech or be doing kind of next to it. I think about CryptoKitties and how that came from, in some ways, colored coins on Bitcoin was before that. And then we've got CryptoKitties and that the NFT boom. And so now NFTs are seen differently, but it's you. I mean, you just minted one today, right, Cheyenne, for 10 years of
The
Ethereum?
10-year anniversary, yeah.
Yeah, so things people might have thought, well, this isn't going to happen. There's not enough space on the chain for CryptoKitties, so we're done with this idea. But then it evolves and changes, and I don't know. It makes me happy to hear about it and to hear these ideas that didn't work, but see it in a positive way, kind of. Okay, so what ideas did work, or that we see now that are like we're still excited about?
Arguably, the move to proof of stake worked.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with early Ethereum history, proof of stake was actually always the intended consensus mechanism. But at the time, it was seen as a little bit too experimental. So the EVM having smart contracts was already extremely experimental. To put it on top of a consensus layer that was also extremely experimental created a lot of risk. And also just the distribution of ETH to begin with, it's hard to start that network with enough users that would make proof of stake fair in a way. So Ethereum, the developers of Ethereum decided, let's stick with the proof of work model. Let's have mining, just like Bitcoin, kind of different. They chose some different algorithms to differentiate themselves, mostly as a security mechanism against attacks from Bitcoin miners. But they decided to go with mining. Down the road, though, they never lost that sight of we want proof of stake. The general belief in many in that community was proof of work was very energy inefficient. It has purpose over in Bitcoin land, but you don't really need a lot of proof of work chains. We want to move over to proof of stake. And by that point, they had seen other communities move to proof of stake. I want to say Cosmos ecosystem showed that it can be very effective and work nicely. So they made that merge, and for I would say what is it optimistic or pessimistic to say 5 years of like, no, we're going to move there now and we're actively doing it. And there was like a constant like, oh, it's going to happen, it's never going to happen, it's going to happen, it's never going to happen. There was just a general concern in the community that it would never take place, and not only would it never take place, but that it was a distraction. There's other things we can be doing that are better. Why are we wasting our time on this? This is too difficult. So I think if there's anything you can do a big round of applause for, it's for a significant part of Ethereum's life, proof of stake seemed like it was never going to happen, and they pulled it off, and somehow they pulled it off very spectacularly to the point where it was boring.
And so this is actually really interesting because it's one of the things because it didn't work at the time, it actually ended up much better. Like there was a lot of conversations that our proof of stake results in like rich getting richer, and like it's harder to decentralize or distribute the coins in a way that like for people that don't have the money to purchase that. So like proof of work and mining resulted in a lot of people being able to mine at home, especially early on, or even like the miners had to sell their tokens to sell their ETH to pay for the electricity bill. So a lot of people were able to like buy those and created a lot of markets. So like the fact that it was proof of work and then switched to proof of stake resulted in a lot of people having some ETH already and being able to become a staker without needing to like buy hardware or just spend money and these other things, which in hindsight, it was actually the best way to do proof of stake and like more decentralized, more better like distribution of tokens, like and that. And to that point, like these failed attempts, although they were like painful to see on crypto Twitter and other places, was actually the best way to do this.
Yeah. hmm Dustin, did you have something you wanted to say, or are you just moving? No? Okay.
No,
Yeah.
I kind of agree with the point, which is that if you had been proof of stake from the start, the criticism is always who are you distributing the stake to, or is the stake, they're all accusations about a Cantillon, like, insiders that just have access to the tokens. Even now, with the fairer proof of work launch, there are still lots of arguments about the pre-sale and how it benefited insiders. But we can say that the distribution is um, as fair as it gets without, being as fair as Bitcoin's, which was like a fair launch. I think that the increased distribution, as Cheyenne spoke of, means that you've got a much wider user base so that when you do switch to proof of stake, you don't have the insider problem. And I think that's the thing that most proof of stake networks have suffered from. So I agree with what both Josh and Cheyenne spoke about.
I can keep going. I've got another example of things that
Yeah.
sucked at first and we made it better.
Yeah.
Decentralized exchange. Decentralized exchange on Ethereum at first was terrible because it turns out the classic order book, like if you go to the Coinbases, the Krakens, the whatever, and you like post your bid of I want to buy Bitcoin or I want to sell Bitcoin, it turns out that model sucks on chain. It sucks for so many reasons. And it just like they tried it. I'm sure there's some that still exist because they're smart contracts, they're available, they're there. Nothing we can do to stop them. But especially when we started learning about something called MEV, minor extracted value, things just got out of hand because it's a weird, awkward system that we weren't thinking about a lot of implications as to how network transactions get settled. So it didn't work. People went back to the drawing board and figured out a new way of doing it. And now you have, liquidity pools in AMMs that is really a fundamentally, easy concept and took me fucking forever to figure out what people were talking about. I kept hearing about it. I had no idea what they're talking about. And eventually someone sat me down and was kind enough to explain it. But ultimately, not too difficult. In a decentralized world, rewards participation, which is a wonderful thing as well. And it's a great example of we tried to apply something that was how you did it. Exchange order book is how you do exchanges in centralized worlds. It's just how it's done. It makes total sense. It's fast, it's efficient, it's beautiful. But it didn't work on chain. Something new had to be developed that worked in the on-chain model. And not to say it's perfect, but it's a fascinating improvement that, I don't think we would have. I don't even know if the ICO craze would have been as effective if it wasn't for them figuring out a better model of decentralized exchange in the form of AMMs.
And I
Actually,
think
yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
I think that like decentralized exchanges really are one of like the early killer use cases because it's one of those things where like currently with Bitcoin, how do you get out of Bitcoin? How do you off-ramp? How do you spend Bitcoin? Most answers, like, there's Lightning Network and everything, but Lightning Network has its own issues. Most answers lead towards go to a centralized exchange and then you can do stuff. Whereas this problem is largely solved from Ethereum. And there are more and more service providers now where you can go to a centralized exchange, you can send it to a smart wallet, and there are like debit card companies that have a smart wallet that you can send your stable coins to, and then you can spend them on that debit card. So you can literally get out of the having the need to have to off-ramp into fiat, and you can actually go and send it to a smart wallet that is that funds a debit card, and you can go out and spend that. So these are things that wouldn't exist without some of the innovations like DEXs, like smart wallets, like being able to issue stable coins on chain. So these are like three like fundamental building blocks that have resulted in us being able to do this stuff.
And on the topic of stable coins, just briefly, since it's one of the more exciting topics that a lot of the general public follows for various reasons, but it is a good example of the ecosystem's evolution because, since the inception of the idea of stable coins, it was also one of the sketchiest parts that had a lot of systemic risk because, going back to the point that the general public understands it, but when, um, rug pulls happen or scams or things, it really discredits the power of the underlying technology. In the past, there was a lot of concerns, and there still are, about depegging and, if the stable coin is actually tied to a real currency, a real tangible currency on the other end. But recently in the US, just this month, the US passed the Genius Act, which has more clear guardrails and federal rules for us here in the US, but I think it's starting to set some more precedents nationally to have, it's pretty much commitment from, the US Treasury and other organizations that there's going to be standards around how stable coins are managed. I think there was something about how they're going to publish monthly reports with proof that it's pegged to real fiat money on the back end and things like that. So it's become much more boring and regulated in that sense. But now there's some real plumbing to let the rest of the use of stable coins be built around it and solidified.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting how something can be seen as, there's a lot of skepticism around it. People aren't for it. And then it's becoming one of the biggest aspects of that technology and what I think has brought it into the mainstream financial market in many ways. Sorry, Cheyenne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so the stablecoin was like a really good example because I remember trying to do the oracles back in the day. Like there was like a lot of issues with like ETH to BTC prices, and like there was no stable value in the middle that we could use. But talking about like DEXs, like Ether Delta was one of the first ones that we were like, it was like an order book that Josh was saying. And we learned so much on that. Like one was like, first of all, you had to like deposit your tokens to that smart contract to be able to exchange. And then later on with like AMMs and Uniswap, we noticed that like the idea so there was like in academia there is idea of atomic swap that like you can just swap right away. And AMMs came to being and it just worked that way. Like there was no other way to work, which was like fascinating to see that they didn't plan to solve this problem, but it just did the way it worked. And one thing that was like really interesting to me was how we dealt with seed phrases and private keys and like Ether Delta. We want to use it. It wanted to become like this self-sustainable website that you don't need any wallets to use. So you would go to the website, it would ask for your private key, you would put your private key in there, and the website worked, and you could just function with it. And then we realized so many, like actually they got hacked, and there was like this code in there that would steal your private key. Then we learned so many like forks and like Ether Belta or like some other websites that like was similar, but the private key was be stolen. And we learned that like, oh wait, the private key should not be something that like we just paste on a website. It should not be that. Like it took us a bunch of iterations to learn, guys, no seed phrases pasting on the website. And if someone asks you that, it's a scam. It's they want to steal your money. But it was
I
the way to
remember there
do
was
things.
I
Yeah,
remember there's so many ways to lose money on Ether Delta as well, right? Like if you there aren't any of these like warnings, which is like you are setting a really, really bad price for your transaction. Are you sure you want to do this? Which, most DEXs do these days. But Ether Delta will be like, you set a price where you're losing 90% of value. Fine, you can do it. You're a grown up.
freedom, financial freedom.
You do you. Go for it. There's one thing I wanted to just go back in terms of kind of what Sonal was saying in terms of stable coins, and now we have this recent legislation with the Genius Act. It's notable because it's kind of the first acknowledgement from the federal government here in the States that hey, crypto is actually a thing, and we're going to regulate it, but allow it to really flourish within those confines. And then also you have things like just yesterday. Chase uh, announced that they're going to have some sort of integration with Coinbase, which is such a far cry from how it used to be, where Chase was arbitrarily shutting down accounts if they happen to be interacting with crypto exchanges. But kind of with that as the backdrop, I've had a couple interesting conversations lately, including yesterday at like a Ethereum 10th birthday party. But the gist of it was like. So, okay, given that like all these big corporations are getting involved and even kind of the government, like, I mean, isn't that a little bit of a, don't you have like some sort of cognitive dissonance? This isn't really the cypherpunk vision. And it's kind of an interesting thought because, yeah, like, I think I speak for most of us in the crypto space that have been around for a while. Like, I sure as hell didn't get involved in crypto in order to, squeeze more profit margins for Fortune 500 companies or this or that. But I think when you zoom out, it's absolutely a validation of the success of Ethereum in terms of its number one goal. And yes, it's always to have been that generalizable smart contract Turing complete thing, but also like of course you could have that as a database. But what makes it special is its credible neutrality. And that is precisely the reason that so many banks, so many different financial institutions and little grassroots projects and everything in between uh, are using Ethereum because it truly is credibly neutral. If there was any chance that Ethereum could be co-opted by a government or a company or a consortium of companies or a couple of rich dudes, then the whole thing is screwed and the whole value prop of Ethereum flies out the window. So, yes, big companies are using uh, Ethereum, banks are using Ethereum, governments might start using them as well. But like that's the most important thing is like that could happen all day long and increasingly, and I think it will, but that doesn't impact the consensus mechanism and the credible neutrality of Ethereum. If it ever did, in other words, if we got the game theory of proof of stake wrong and at some point that was called into question, the whole foundation upon which Ethereum rests would really collapse and be called into question. But uh, yeah, it's sort of like, the internet where you have everybody can really use the internet and free open protocols like SMTP with email and TCP/IP, and that goes from, everywhere from, a little, 8-year-old student in Kenya to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company to a giant, to endless use cases. Anybody can use it. Ethereum is the same. And it's just kind of interesting to see that. Like, credible neutrality really does uh, get the world involved. And this is why I think when people say this is kind of the next internet, the next iteration of the internet, a new type of internet, it sounds a little bit hyperbolic, but it's also true.
I think this is a really good point because, there was a point in like 2017, 2018 where you had like, R3 Corda, Hyperledger, and all these like enterprise consortium chains that were fighting for, we're blockchain like, but we're ledger-based technology, but we're not blockchain and we're not crypto, right? And it was all along the blockchain is cool, but then we don't trust, these public networks. And 2017, 2018, they were doing lots of push to get people and banks and financial institutions to build on that. That's all gone now, right? Right now, they'll do it on the L2, they'll do it on linear. And I think what's interesting is that it's that capitulation has kind of, it's sealed the conversation, which is public blockchains are where you want to deploy on. And if you want to change the rules a bit, you can do it on your own rollup. You can have a different validator set, and people buy into that by using that network. And if they don't agree to that, then they won't buy into that network. So it becomes one of those things where you you play in this credibly neutral space on the Ethereum L1, and then there's a limited set of tools and permissions you can set within your rollup. But if it's not on the L1, it doesn't settle to the L1, then it's got reduced value and security guarantees. And that's what people have transitioned away from these enterprise chains onto, doing it on L2s for.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as the tech fades away, apps will handle the complexity so people don't have to think about it and they can just transact or play or invest. And like Kent was saying with TCP, back in the days, you had to actually go online. You actually had to be quite technical to use a computer back in the day, whether you knew it or not. Um, and it's kind of like the start of Ethereum, where you need to understand some of these concepts to use it because you don't just understand keys and cryptography. But today we don't think about the internet at all, just like we are able to use the apps on our phone or our email online, and we don't have to think about the back end or really set things up. And with Ethereum today, you still feel every layer, like you still need to understand the actual different layers in the technology or things, because these are terms that are coming up in the interface. But it just kind of reminds you that we're going to hopefully be working towards this future where, in a few years, some of that complexity vanishes, where wallets, key management, and all of that happens in the background and safely. And people can actually start to use the technology in the same ways they browse Instagram today, and Ethereum will become the invisible infrastructure that powers the financial rails, the gaming economy, digital identities, and all of those exciting use cases that people understand. So hopefully that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and behind the scenes during all that, there will continue to be all these technical advancements. And I know that there's a timeline that already exists and is out there. There always has been, of where we're going. And so, Dustin, do you want to, or Cheyenne, whoever, want to talk a little bit in the few minutes we have left about where we're going? So this stream is titled From CryptoKitties, which was back in 2017, to Glamsterdam. So what are we talking about with Glamsterdam?
I can add something, and maybe Dustin, you can fill in the gaps. So like we kind of started talking about how change in Ethereum has been easy and Bitcoin has been like hard. Glamstone is one of the forks similar to like even the last fork that is like there's a lot of discussions in like what to prioritize, what to include, what not to include. And we've seen like before with some other changes that like Prog Pow or some other that like spend years developing and having it and they were never included and we realized it's actually not good not to have it. So there's a bunch of different changes that are proposed for Glamsterdam that now their developers are trying to like argue which should be prioritized. Like, so here, there was actually this other website I used a few days ago to like show signal your priority, which was an interesting one because now they want the community to like point out what they value and like how, um, what they value and what they want to prioritize. So I'm just gonna share this here. Maybe just Dustin, while you have the screen, we can also show that. It's called forecast.org. Um, so yeah, there are like changes about like a lot of changes about like censorship resistance of the network. That is now the questions about like should we prioritize this versus like 6 seconds blocks rather than 12 seconds as currently is there, or like EVM, which is like like EOF, which is like more on the way EVM works. Something that is like kind of controversial and I'm scared of it is like this delayed execution, which is like so far smart contracts are like when you call them, they just execute. And that's why we have like MEV and some other ones. But the delayed execution, they want to include something as like you call a function to be executed at a later time. It enables some interesting use cases as like fair ordering, as like whoever calls this function in this order, it would be executed in the same order. But then what does that mean for the security of a lot of other smart contracts? There's like so many questions I have about this one that is like kind of scares me. And Yeah, so these are the changes. It's up to her discussion. The one good thing that I noticed is like there are so many of these websites, explanators, explaining websites that talks about each EIP in a way that is like more human readable than the EIP websites, like the EIP pages on GitHub, which is something that we didn't have even 4 years ago. So that's a pretty good progress, I would say.
I,
Explainer websites.
I,
Is it
I,
explainer? I don't know. As you're saying that, Cheyenne, I'm like, is it explainer? And English is my first language. So, but I think that's, yes, I think they're explainers.
I I think it's useful to talk about like why more of these websites exist now as well. I think that Fusaka was a bit of a clusterfuck because basically the long story short was that EOF was a really big change, and everyone was worried that, if they didn't get their change in before the EOF upgrade, then they would have to wait a really long time because I have to wait like two forks down the road to get my changes in. So what happened was everyone started like, stuffing as many upgrades as they could or EIPs that they wanted into the upgrade before Fusaka, which is where EOF was supposed to be. And they stuffed so many changes in that what was supposed to be a very simple upgrade had to be split into two upgrades. So I think that they have kind of changed the rules a little bit around like how you get upgrades in, and certain upgrades are being pushed further in the future. And then there's a lot more, conversations like this is headliner selection. We never used to have this like headliner selection thing, but headliner selection is basically every upgrade has certain EIPs that are the star EIPs, like like effective balance, or in the previous ones there was the merge. It was all of those like headliners that these are the changes that everyone wants. And then there's some changes that pertain like more to stakers or more to like certain like people that are developing for the EVM. So I think that what's interesting with this is that it's kind of the people that are the core devs that are doing the upgrades are realizing that we need to communicate this a lot better, and we need to um, get stakeholders on board in a more clear fashion, because there have been a lot of problems like with the last upgrade around managing all of these things, around managing people, managing expectations. There was, a bunch of upgrades that were contentious, and then they were flagged for inclusion, and then a community would go, wait, we never wanted this change in, and then they had to have discussions around like changing it. So yeah, this is an explanation for why the communication around this is improving, because the complexity has increased a lot as well.
Yeah, like to what Dustin's saying, like the same website has like the Fusaka page too that shows like 34 EIPs got rejected to be included, which is a lot of EIPs and a lot of discussions. Like each one of those EIPs included like discussions on the call, like pages and writing up and like how what was included, like why it should be included and why not. Which is yeah, not nothing.
I've also heard some rumors about certain headliner EIPs that some teams are dead set against. So I think there are interesting times ahead for some headliner EIPs.
Yeah, I think one of those is like something called fossil, what is it exactly it stands for? It's for the Glamsterdam, that mainly includes like the I want to say the name right, fork choice inclusion list, that is like mainly pushes all the validators to prove that they actually include a transaction. Let's say like Tornado Cash transaction, which now should not be sanctioned. I know the court is going on for like Roman Storm, but like the sanctions on the smart contract were removed. So let's say if the protocol wants to push that every validator should include those transactions with this fork choice inclusion list, you can. It adds more of that strength that like some block builders that just reject all the transaction to a smart contract, which is and it could be an issue. Like so far it's been okay and manageable, but it could become an issue, especially with more centralized, it's like stakers, like more institutional that are coming in and have like massive amount of ETH staked. So those could be an issue, and this is one of the ones that I'm pro being included. And there was actually I tweeted something yesterday about there was a tweeted thread about going with more details about how much of a technical difficulty would it be to like implement this and how much effort would that be, how much of changes that includes. That was like a really good breakdown of like how hard it is to implement this, and this was like 2 out of 5 to actually like get through, which is in my mind it's manageable.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
think it's really,
also yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I think
Go
it's
ahead.
really important that something like this gets through, because what you have is that the reality is, and this reality that you have to contend with, is that independent operators of stakers are a minority. They have become even more of a minority. Staking has become a very much a professional, you not just a data center level, like you have to be above data center level. It's somewhere just below AI data center. That's the level of complexity that you need to be a block producer. And basically this means that you have a lot more bigger companies that have lots of legal reasons to, like, oh, I don't want to touch Tornado Cash, or I don't want to touch certain transactions because certain governments might not want me to. But then that erodes away the credible neutrality. So something like this being done at the protocol level is kind of like a bulwark against the fact that we don't have as many independent operators to enforce credible, neutral things that governments may not like.
Yeah, and I think based on what you both have been talking about and reviewing with Glamsterdam, it is just showcasing that Ethereum and the ecosystem have really a governance model that works to progress the open source technology through EIPs and the public inputs from core developers and stakeholders that are able to help drive the roadmap. And Glamsterdam's the next big upgrade set for, I think it's 2026, if I saw correctly. So it's really exciting that they're always working on the next big pieces that really do have significant technical impacts. And if I'm understanding correctly, as a functional person with Glamsterdam, block processing is going to be faster, gas will be leaner, and there will be more synergy with layer 2 and how the layers work. But it kind of just goes to show that any of the roadblocks to adoption for the technology, for all the different use cases and industries that it can touch, some of which we talked about today, those concerns are always taken into account for the future evolution of the technology.
Yeah, Dustin, do you want to quickly show the roadmap? I think we had it up for a second. I just put it in the YouTube chat as well. But yeah, I think that kind of shows what you guys were saying and how Sonal tied it all together. It was interesting, I think, looking through all of the things as we were talking about this live stream and then going through historical, what we've all experienced and what we've seen as we scroll down. Like if you go all the way down towards the bottom, Dustin, when it goes to like consensus layer hard forks and just going down some of the things that like Bellatrix, I'm like, oh my God, that name, I like forgot about even hearing about that. And so some of this stuff, I don't even remember what it was, but it's like you see these things and it comes back. Shanghai, it seems like not a big deal now, but at the time, these things are all big deals and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I think scrolling through it is just kind of like, we talk about the merge a lot, but there are so many different pieces to it. The merge, I think, is the only one where I actually remember where I was right after it went through. And the first person I saw after, which was Cheyenne on a street corner in Bogota. But yeah, it's cool to look back through it all.
I mean, I think if there's one thing that Ethereum has managed to do since day one, since those t-shirts I was talking about, since each of these meetings where, so many people from around the world get together and discuss these changes, or push changes different ways, work on things. Ethereum has managed to inspire a lot of people. Not necessarily always with specific results, specific products, specific services, but inspiration on ways to potentially improve it. You can call them experiments a lot of the times. I think you can call the entire thing still a big fascinating experiment. But it definitely, inspires this committee to meet every week and discuss the changes that we've seen, the topics, the themes. And I'm sure it inspires many people to try and build things, to try and, put cat images on a chain to trade around, to figure out a way to add privacy to transactions. Just the inspiration of what can a general purpose world computer do. And I think that's Ethereum's biggest asset. Hasn't always been the technology, but the technology and the community behind it that just like has a general sense of what can we do.
Yeah, I just want to add to something that you just said that is really, really important, because I remember like there was like a lot of other projects like Polkadot or like some other projects that actually were pretty decent in the tech, like their vision, but they couldn't have the community around to actually have this many devs working on it. We've seen a similar thing in like Ethereum too. Like one of the first programming languages for smart contract was Viper. And I'm a Python guy, so like that was like my thing. Like I was really happy about that. But then I learned there was not enough community around Viper versus Solidity. So there was like less development tooling. It was like, always like a compiler was a bit behind. There was like so much of that the community was the reason Solidity became what it is now, versus there was like actually like Viper was first. But we saw a lot of other blockchains that had like really good ideas. The tech was like seemed sound, but the community to actually make it happen, test it, try to break it, recover from the break, like all those didn't exist. So we're all Ethereans and in the last 10 years.
Like that, we are all Ethereum.
Yeah.
We are all Ethereum. All right, guys. Anything else we wanted to discuss before we head out for the day? I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think we did a good job of going kind of high level and then getting into some of the specific text. But was there anything we missed?
I think one thing I want to shout out is that because I know that some core devs that have been working very hard on like coordinating feedback and stuff like that. And it's been a difficult job for them because it sometimes gets very contentious. And what I find kind of distasteful sometimes is that there have been people that have like called into question their personal character, which is like, why are you blocking this change, or why are you doing, why are you trying to influence the protocol development this way? And then they look into the person's history. You used to be from this company, you probably have equity, or you have some kind of like hidden profit motive for blocking my change, when like it's kind of the toxic stuff that forces open source like repository maintainers to go, I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I think that, while we may feel passionate about certain changes or protocol on certain things we want to do, at the end of the day, it's still a person behind there. We haven't replaced them with AI yet. So I to Cheyenne's point about we are all Ethereans, we should also think about the people that are working tirelessly to, maintain the platform, to do all these changes, coordinate all these calls. And there are certain lines where if you cross it and you're just calling into question someone's character because you don't like the fact that they blocked your change, I mean, grow a pair and grow up, because we're all trying to do this together, and there's no need to make it, make someone's life hell for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's so many different people behind the scenes that come into this, and they're working really hard to make it happen. And yeah, I think we're lucky to be a part of this community. And I thank you guys all for being part of C4's community, because we really couldn't do this without you. Anybody have any other closing closing statements, remarks, comments before we say goodbye for our.
Just as a cool, interesting thought exercise as we wrap this up, and we kind of touched on some of the forward-looking stuff, but just like sit back and think, man, what is this going to look like in another 10 years? It's hard to even fathom, given how far we've come. I think Ethereum will be a substrate and foundational layer for like the world in so many ways. Maybe I'm just crazy bullish on this tech and how it's going to change the world, but it's exactly what we need in order to disintermediate the centralized institutions that have brought so much chaos and shittiness on this world. So well, I'm excited to have this chat in another decade. It'll be cool.
And you know what? I do think we're all going to be here having this talk. I mean, if you think about it, most of us have been here since we formed this committee in 2019. So that's, it'll be 6 years, August, 19th. So we're 2 weeks out from the 6-year anniversary of us starting this committee, which actually is pretty cool if you think about how quickly after the tech that this was started. Cheyenne, you've been the committee chair for 6 years now, because weren't you the chair from day one, or did you get voted in later?
I think so. Yeah, I don't remember, but I think it was like from the very first moments. And the thing that Ken said, in a decade we're gonna all be here. Like, I hope that's true. But at the same time, I may be just farming, like actual farming in a random place in Costa Rica or something. It
Well,
depends how the next 10 years go.
I think committee membership is did we say a billion-year commitment? So we'll find your farm and make sure that you come and join us.
As long as we're still friends and we're able to come see you on the farm, that's what matters. But it is cool that we do talk every week, all of us, and to say how bullish you are, Kent, on this. I mean, we all are. We wouldn't spend so much of our time talking about this, geeking out about it, loving it, and doing what we can to educate others. And on that line, please, if you don't follow us already on social media or on YouTube, subscribe, and we will continue having more exciting conversations about Ethereum, from zoomed in technical lens to zoomed out what's happening in the world of Ethereum at large. So thank you guys for joining, everyone who's watching, and thank you to our committee for being so dedicated to Ethereum and to C4. Appreciate you. And we will see you guys next time. All right, bye.